The only other thing that I could think of from the Neverspring universe is the story of Gafgaren. And super spoiler alert, very big spoiler alert. At the end of the game, when you're playing, you fight Gafgaren and you defeat him. And he was trying to open a portal to Svedanta's realm so that he could kill her and basically free himself from the curse that she put on him when he accepted her powers. He's never trying to destroy the world or anything like that. Like he's fully confident that he has what it takes to stand toe to toe against the goddess of chaos. Like he thinks that he can beat her. So the scene where Gafgaren's talking to Svedanta when he's trying to save Melena's life, in their conversation they mention how when magic users use dark magic, the source is from the goddess of chaos and stuff, and that there's like there's a toll, right, like a price to be paid, and it's a price of flesh, right? So your body starts to wither away. Like it starts with like scars and sores and then deformities and like so. The idea actually came from I always thought it was interesting how black mages in the Final Fantasy series like always covered themselves, to the point where you couldn't see anything. It was just like their little glowing yellow eyes and like just like a blackness under their hat. And I had also read a book series. So like a really powerful dark wizard would wind up looking in the Neverspring universe, would want to hide his appearance and probably wind up looking like one of those black mages from the Final Fantasy universe, right? Where he's going to have like a big hat that covers his face and he'd wear like robes and stuff like that. So you can't see that one of his limbs is shriveled up. And if you see them just standing there regular, it would be, not a pretty sight to look at. They would look just twisted and deformed. And so, she warns him, she's like, every time you use this and eventually, it'll take you completely. Like, I only need to use it this once, he tells her. And so he's not worried about, whatever price he has to pay. And so he accepts what she calls the Kiss of Shadow. And every time he uses dark magic, he will, have something happen to him. So he goes to use it the one time and it messes his face up real bad. And so that's why when you see him later, so that's why like, when he's young, he's like this and he's just wearing like, the robes of an Eldritch Squire and stuff like that. And then later on when you see him when he's grown up, he's got this facial covering, this ornate imperial design type like face covering. And then the suit that he wears all the time, there's actually I never mention it in the game because it's not fully relevant. It might be interesting, like maybe I'll add it in like through some lore crumbs or something like that. But there's a purpose to the suit he wears, and Lugai made it for him. It's probably Lugai's greatest, like truly like his greatest invention that actually works, and he didn't do anything weird to it or like mess it up. But the suit lets him. It basically negates a lot of the effects of the Kiss of Shadow. So it lets him use dark magic if he wants to, and it slows down like by a lot. It slows down the curse, right? But still, he doesn't use dark magic. The whole reason that he commissions the suit is so that when he goes to summon Svedanta again, he has to use dark magic. And again, like I left this part out of the game, maybe I'll put it back in later. But so when he uses it, it's a huge amount of dark magic, right? That's why he never uses dark magic unless he absolutely has to, like, right? Like, and so like the suit basically protects him from the effects of using the black magic, right? Because Lugai was able to develop it while he was developing the siphon because he was doing all this work on redirecting. And he mentions this at one point, like in some of his personal logs. He's like doing all this research on redirecting the physical effects of black magic and stuff like that. And so he winds up, the culmination of his research is the suit that Gafgaren's wearing. It's like a Magitech power armor almost. And so so when Gafgaren goes to open the portal, like he knows that eventually he's going to have to open the portal, right? And so when he does, it's going to like, it would kill him without the suit. And so, but he didn't know that initially when he was young. So that's like sort of part of the tragedy of the whole story is that Gafgaren, sacrifices his health and like kind of enslaves himself to darkness to save this girl that he's in love with that doesn't love him back. And then, he makes everyone promise that they'll push the attack, that they'll continue like without him and open the thing. But what he didn't realize at the time was the amount of dark magic that it takes to open a portal to the nightmare where Svedanta lives would kill somebody. It would immediately complete the Kiss of Shadow. And so in a weird way, they kind of saved his life by breaking the promise and not doing it. So like he finds out later, and that's why he has the suit commission. He's got to wear the suit. And so in the game, when he opens the portal and you fight him, like I didn't want to like, kind of ruin it for the player and like make it feel like you weren't like, getting the thing, but he's greatly weakened. Like, and that's why everyone's able to, you're able to like finally defeat him, is because he's undergoing the effects of the Kiss of Shadow, like draining on him and stuff. And so again, like the spoiler alert here is that when he sacrifices himself, he realizes that it's just not going to work out. Right. Like, and he can either, go down as a bad guy and ruin things for everyone by letting Svedanta get out into the world, or he can, make one last act of redemption and set everything right as best he can by sacrificing himself to close the portal, and he does. So when he does, the very last scene of the game, just before the credits, you see Gafgarin's been pulled into Svedanta's realm. And he like, he's like crawling, he's like, wounded and weak, and he's crawling, and these like black slimes, these like these like cosmic horrors start like, kind of creeping up on him, and then the screen fades out and you hear fighting, and then you hear like Gafgarin like yell like he like he's been struck down. And then the game ends and the credits roll. The game, I did have like sort of a game idea that would be maybe like a platformer, or like a Metroidvania type style game, or possibly like a third person shooter, but it's like magic. Storyline though is not necessarily kind to Gafgarin. And so when he does, again, spoiler alert, when he does eventually make a comeback, if I'm ever able to finish the second game, he's in Svedanta's service. So he's destined to lose whatever struggle that he might go through in this land, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, so in making a game about it, I just wonder how players would feel. Like I don't know, like how would you feel if you played Zelda and Link dies at the end, right? Or Link winds up having to like serve Ganon at the end, or something like that. Now, granted, it's supposed to direct you to the rest of the story, right? It's like an offshoot, like a, like a side thing. But if you don't know that, right? Like, so let's say you're just, the game is just called Gafgarin. You pick it up, you play it. You're like, oh, cool, and you beat all this stuff. And you're like, well, then what the hell did I play the game for if I'm just going to lose to the bad guy? You know what I mean? Like, kind of thing. I don't know. Maybe it's a game design issue, right? Like, can it be designed in a way that that the game's rewarding and, you feel a sense of accomplishment even though you're destined to lose? It would be an interesting concept to explore. So maybe you could start with a scene that kind of shows, the party like beating Gafgarin and he's all like, oh no, and he's getting sucked into the portal. And he's like, no, when he gets sucked in. And so that would just be your intro. And then you would have to start the game, and there's these monsters that are like surrounding him, and he's hurt, and they start moving towards him, and then the scene fades out, right, and you hear them fighting. So the first level would have to be you surviving this, right? So Gafgarin had to survive here, and now I've thought of a couple ways to do this. My natural instinct is for a female. I don't know why yet. Like sometimes I just like things just feel right, but a female character, someone who doesn't belong either, but has been there a long time. But I don't know who she is yet. But she shows up, so you fight, but you start to lose, right? It looks like you're going to lose. That's not how you spell lose. And just as you're about to lose, she shows up. Wing. And she's like, she doesn't say anything. Her mouth is covered. She's mysterious. That's her little bandana, right? So a mysterious person appears. And Gafgaren's there, and he's still in his suit. So he's got his cape. And she helps him, right? So I can go two ways with this. I feel like this is one way to do it. Either you're going to lose, like, do you lose and then this other person shows up? Or do you beat it and then you have a moment? Because, like, there's a sense of isolation I'm getting from, because what's weird about this is, like, there's some parts of, like, the Neverspring story that, like, I almost feel like I'm not necessarily writing them. I feel like I'm like pulling them from somewhere, if that makes sense. Like they are like the story has already happened and the people already exist and all that stuff, but that's like in my mind and I have to like put it out there. So sometimes you might hear me like explain things kind of weird, like as if they've already happened or something. But I don't know. It's hard to explain. It's just like kind of, I guess, my process, if you will. But there's this sense of isolation that I feel in Gafgaren and like that's in this place, right? Because there's like one of the things that makes Vedanta who she is she's like uncomfortably flirty, right? Like she's very seductive and like, you know, this kind of stuff. But it's not like a love, right? Or even a lust. It's like a smothering, like a trapping kind of love, right? Like and so that's the kind of time a person might feel alone, even in the company of others, right? When you're feeling trapped, or like, you know, you have to be somewhere or something like that, right? And so there's this sense of isolation, like inescapable isolation of just being alone, like by yourself, even though there's a lot of other things there, like, and so I like, while this feels natural for some reason, I feel like it kind of like there's a moment that I feel is important where Gafgaren needs to be alone, right? And I feel like the best time to do it is right after this fight. But I can't do it if this happens, and you'll see why, right? So like the idea is like, so like let's say that you don't almost lose. Let's say that, you know, it's a hard fight, Gafgaren gets it. But remember like what I was saying earlier about his suit. So he's wearing this so you've got Gafgaren, he's a magic user, right? He can also use dark magic, but he doesn't because it messes him up. It does bad things to his health. But the suit protects him from a lot of that. He's got this like Magitech armor, kind of like power armor suit going on, but it's like it's been heavily damaged. It just had to use a lot of sources like fuel from not only opening the portal like in the thing, but like fighting the player as Merrick and Natasha's party. Right, like, so you arrive weak and low on resources and immediately get thrown into a life or death situation, and you just barely get through it. And so once you're done, there's just kind of like this like calm or this silence, right? Like where you're taking stock of everything. And so at this point, like Gafgaren would kind of sit alone, right, and sort of take stock of his situation. Like maybe he like starts looking at his like power suit and he's like determining how damaged it is. Maybe he's like trying to figure out like, you know, what he needs to do to get out of there, or like what happened, or like reflects on the past and stuff. And so he decides that he needs to keep moving. He just needs to keep moving, right? And this place is almost like a shadowy wasteland. Like there's no, like, you know, like the plants are all strange, everything's weird. So now we need to kind of develop what happens in between, right? Because in the end, what needs to happen is Gafgaren needs to confront Svedanta, and he needs to lose. And when he loses, he has to join her. So it goes like right now, it goes really well with like the whole Gafgaren like storyline, because he was trying to get away from her, tries to do this stuff, right? And this is his ultimate thing that he doesn't want to have happen, right? He doesn't want to be a pawn but he becomes one anyways. And so this is where the game would end, and it would explain what happens to Gafgarin between Neverspring and if I'm ever able to do the second game when he comes back, because when he comes back, he's very changed, right? Like he's older, he's gone through a lot of stuff. Because in the first game, Gafgarin's like borderline merciful a lot. Like he's like not necessarily merciful, but he has a very distinguished code of like how to deal with people. And when he comes back, he does not have that anymore. He's very, very ruthless when he returns. And so this game needs to properly, like, it would basically be like the fall of a character who by all intents has already fallen, you know what I mean? Like, so it's almost like a kick in the pants. But so we need to find out what happens here, right? I like and of course, you know, I like the one that's already finished, and I know practically the whole story through and through. But let's scratch that one, of course, and let's see what we can do here, right? So let's say if we take Gafgarin idea, we're gonna do 2D and side scroller Metroidvania platformer type game. Possibly roguelike, possibly. And we're going to use Unity. Okay. So we need to figure out what happens in between. All right, so now here's where the fun part starts. All that was all technical babble, figuring stuff out. Now let's take what we've learned, like the kind of stuff that I talked about, like in the Dignity of Evil video and things like that. Like, there's a lot of videos out there where it talks about like how to come up with characters or how to come up with scenes and stuff. So let's try and apply what we've learned here and in real time develop something. So let's see. So we've got this here. All right. So my first instinct is to go with a list. What's that, baby? Okay. A list of things that we have to keep in mind, right? Like, I guess you'd almost call them like lore or something like that. So this game is about Gafgarin and Svedanta. Takes place in Nightmare. Okay, so things that we got to keep in mind. Gafgarin's weapon. So Gafgarin is proficient in both his sword and his magic, right? Because he's an Eldritch Knight. So it'd be like a mage blade. And we also have to keep in mind, so this will be an interesting mechanic for the game, right? So Gafgarin's power armor is something we have to keep in mind, right? So his power armor is, we know that it is protecting him from the effects of using dark magic. And now he's found himself in a realm of dark magic and his power suit is damaged. So that just screams at me that we need an interesting mechanic for his suit maintenance, and possibly even something to like, maybe like as your suit gets messed up, like, you know, and you have to use like dark magic or something like that. Maybe like, you know, if you don't maintain your suit, you might lose by, you know, like over like draining yourself or something. Okay, and so this is something I haven't mentioned yet, but it's part of the lore and it would be important in this aspect, right? So Svedanta has like captains or commanders or whatever you will, right? So like in Final Fantasy 4 or 2 on the SNES, like with Cecil and Tella and, you know, all those guys, and Kane and stuff. In that game, you had like the 4 fiends of elements. And so likewise, kind of in that same spirit, a long time ago, I decided that Svedanta would have these, like, you know, like lieutenants or captains or whatever that would eventually be, you know, like bosses that you would have to defeat in, you know, later Neverspring story stuff. And so Svedanta has what are called her 7 sorrows. And these also tie into her backstory as to why she was imprisoned and like what's going on in her star, right? So we've got, what was it? Let me see if I can remember it off the top of my head. I know desire was one, loss was one. Shoot, I can't remember the 7th one. But so you can tell there's like a theme in play here. Her seven sorrows were desire, loss, regret, rage, neglect, despair, and then I can't remember the seventh one. Was it? It wasn't pride, because it's not like a seven sins thing. Like, it's kind of like seven sins thing, but it's not. It's more like seven emotions, right? But so desire is like kind of like like if you were to go like seven sins with it, right? Like desire would be like lust, rage would be like, well, rage. The way that like Sonata's stuff works is when she finds a champion for each of her seven sorrows is when she tries to break out into the world. And at the time of Neverspring, she's only missing one, and it's regret. And so Gafgaren is fated to become Svedata's seventh sorrow, and he becomes regret. So all of these seven sorrows are actually like, you know, not to use like a title, but they're like different heroes of might and magic throughout the land from all different times. So like some of them are from like not that long before Gafgaren. Some of them are from like 1,000 years ago, and they've been waiting in the nightmare along with Svedata for her to find like the rest of the sorrows and stuff like that, you know. So they've been there like a long time. Like some of these people were in early access, the version I had to rewrite. Like Desire, Loss were there, Gafgaren as Regret, Neglect was there, and then I can't remember who the seventh one is. But so basically these would be like your game bosses. So you would have to have at least 7 like levels, and then an 8th level. Because I'm starting to like think of it like from a Mega Man point of view, right? Where there's like stages with a boss. So what else do you have to keep in mind? So Nightmare is where you're pulled into when like the Kiss of Shadow completes, right? Like, so like if you're like a dark wizard or something like that, you just kept using it, and then eventually you get consumed, like you were brought here. So there's other people wandering around here. It's just like dark, and there's all these like weird creatures there, and there's like, you know, like I guess you would call them like damned souls, right? Because they're like like basically everybody there that like if you meet another person there, they're probably bad, right? Because they've been like the only way you get there normally is to complete the curse of the Kiss of Shadow by using too much dark magic. And so like another thing to know that I haven't really like touched on a lot yet, but is mentioned in Neverspring, is that, you know, like Gafgaren is like kind of like a rags to riches sort of story, right? Like he grew up poor on the streets, and, you know, he became an Eldritch Knight. But the original idea for Gafgaren, and in the early access version of the game, every time you saw him, or almost every time you saw him, he was always flanked by these 2 like dark mages. And those characters were supposed to be initially his childhood friends from the streets that he brought up with him. And so these friends of his were also like pretty competent magic users. And Gafgaren realized, like in the original story, Gafgaren was a senator. And so he couldn't, because he was in the public light so much, he couldn't afford to mess up his appearance by using dark magic. And so basically over time, like the 2 friends of his became like dark mages, like on his behalf, right? So they were kind of like his bodyguards, his thugs, his trusted, you know, friend. Like they were his friends, you know. And he lets them continue using dark magic on his behalf until it winds up eventually consuming both of them. Right, and then they're gone. And so as I rewrote the story, I decided to move all this back to having it already happened, and for like slightly different reasons, because Gafgaren's not a senator, he's an Eldritch Knight now. And so technically, even though I don't mention it or anything, like all that lore and story is like still there and like active in the story, and it exists. So this might actually be, now that I'm thinking about that, when we were talking about how like the people who were there were consumed by the curse, this might actually be an interesting time to bring that up. So this is one of the things I learned about like when you're like trying to like write something, right? Or like come up with ideas and stuff, is to like not to be afraid when things branch off, right? And then when things start connecting, like lean into that, right? Like, because it's the whole idea, right, is that you're trying to tell a specific story, and so you want the story to be as really as like, I mean, I'm sure this changes when you're like, you know, Tolkien or R.R. Martin level writer. You know what I mean? Where you can like, you know, have these huge expansive stories with like multiple layers of characters and dramas unfolding. Like it probably changes then. But for me and for now, like I like to try to keep my stories as tight as possible and not go off and stuff. So when things branch, I like it better when they branch and then run into something that's already there, right? So like when we were first talking about this, all we really knew, like as we were thinking, right, was this stuff, right? It takes place Nightblade, you know, and then we're going into this. And then I remembered, right, well, we've got Sonata's Seven Sorrows. That like so while that's technically branching out, it's also relevant because these could be our boss fights, right? And we could also introduce them because they're relevant later in the game. So I like how that connects, right? So then we also have this idea of, you know, the Kiss of Shadow and how like people get sent there and stuff like that, right? And so really at first I was thinking, well, that might be a good way if I need to just sort of like spontaneously come up with somebody to show up. Like remember the idea we were talking about where like maybe like the girl character shows up to save him sort of thing. You know, like this explains why people are there, right? So I'm like, okay, like that's relevant to the story and stuff. And then I thought we were starting to get off track here as I was thinking of this, but then I remembered that the friend's there. And now I'm starting to look back and realizing that we might be able to tie into this, right? Because one of the things in play too, right? Like, so just as a side piece here, right? We know that Gafgarin was almost obsessed, right? Because there's a fine line between love and obsession. And so Gafgarin in reality was obsessed with Milena. And now what happens when somebody's like that? Like whether this has happened to you or whether you've seen somebody else have it happen to, right? You get these blinders on when you have, you know, this kind of idea that just this one person is all you need, right? Like if I could just be with this one person, like if they would like me, like, you know, whatever, like, you know, you get these blinders on because you're looking at that one person, right? And so when that happens, we don't notice the things around us. And what often happens is that there's somebody already there or somebody notices you a little bit later, but you don't notice them because you're busy, you know, going after this other person. So like I said, like I tend to be a fan of like tragedy and redemption. So forgive me if I keep leaning towards like tragedies and stuff like that. But the first thought that comes to mind is what if one of the friends was a neglected love interest, right? So what if one of the friends like loved him and did this to themselves, hoping that he would just notice them, like that like notice that they like, you know, that they loved him like that. And then the other one, like, so how would we tie them together, right? For like, so now we're trying to think of like things we can do that are like poignant, right, for the story. So let's grab a new layer here.